Rervlaror Vale, the gateway between East and Western Destinal. Long this pass was used as a way for the Dracons to enter into the east of Destinal, but for now, upon the coming of the humans, it now plays host to one of the four kingdoms. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel and to the world of Aphalas, and to this, the first video looking at the insights of one of the kingdoms, one of the four kingdoms of humans to begin with. Today looking at the Kingdom of Rervlaror. The Kingdom of Rervlaror is a bit more of a unique standing among the four kingdoms, as it consisted of the Felden who travelled west from the grasslands around Tarassil and the Emerald River. Notably, the Felden are also those who founded Tarassil, sharing kinship between the two, and elements also helped found Cavoltaire. So they've got a fair mix around this proportion of Destinal, but the unique thing about Rervlaror is that the Felden were not alone in founding the kingdom. In fact, if we scroll up north to the Fayoun in the mountain holdings, their ancestors, the Sertians, a offshoot of them formed into a great fleet and travelled south. And together, alongside these Felden explorers, they helped found the Kingdom of Rervlaror, this great vale, and they formed great cities together, sharing the cultures of the hill-type folk as well as the grasslands, melding it into quite a nice mix and making the land very hospitable for them. These great cities included Jarathil, Farallon and Dothasir, which you can see on the map right there. If we look into the way that the kingdom is laid out, and I will point out that obviously we're going off of the lore work I have already done timeline wise, so there's a few other notable figures scattered around, but for this primarily it's going to be around Tonrif's War through to the conclusion of Galakaros. So here we have the layout of the kingdom in terms of the coat of arms. House Rothtain are at this point in the timeline the current rulers of Rervlaror, with the kings in this order being King Sar II, who passed away 13 years before Rervlaror. No, not before Rervlaror, before Tonrif's War occurs. And after him comes... No, sorry, I fudged that up. He passed away in 302 BGS, so it actually makes it 22 years beforehand. But so now Rervlaror at the beginning and throughout Tonrif's War is actually ruled, well, the first initial part is ruled by Sauron the First, who marries Caris of the House Zeebthil of Jarathil, which is part and parcel as to why the crown is on there. The other reason why is because Jarathil is the capital. With the ruling family being based in the east, their holdings being based in the east, they wanted to ensure that the west was also drawn in, so they made their capital in the western provinces. And the first stage, and we will just go through the others as well. You've got House Brinzen of Harakloch in the north there, and then in the cluster of hills next to Jarathil, between Jarathil and the Narrakon in here, there's a tiny bit of writing. I don't know how well you're seeing it. That is Dothalon, and that is House Hirith. It serves as a hidden base, but it's also a refuge of some description that's very enclosed, very defensible, with almost direct access onto the west bank towards the Aphalas Cove. And then scattered away quite far to the southeast is Farallon. It is the most excluded out of all the territories, and yet probably one of the most fiercely loyal. And it's held by House Fortiska, who make up the main sort of seafaring side of Rervlaror in a lot of cases, having a bit of a rivalry with Pelachoth from Cavoltir on that front. But Tonreef, moving on to the first conflict that I wrote about Rervlaror being involved in. Tonreef, if you have seen the Disaster at Roldathine video, he has already surprise attacked a convoy of Dragons, and they've pushed out, and the Dragons have sent riders off. They have not warned Rervlaror of this yet, because they do not know the true scale of what they're up against, and the chief task of the Dragons and the Wood Elves is to safeguard Destinal, and only bring the human kingdoms in if necessary, as they were the sort of shepherds and guardians of them. But the demons under Tonreef launch a mass assault on the Dragons and the Wood Elves, and through to the mid-250s, so 25-ish years, it is just them. It is not until 255 BGS that Rervlaror will start having direct involvement in all of this. And that is... Hang on, I'm trying to get down to it. That is... And interestingly enough, it's not a direct assault through Haracloch, which would be the main avenue for Tonreef to sail from. And if I've edited this correctly, I will be doing some annotations. But he attacks from the coast. Gathering what ships he has and everything, he strikes into the Aphalas Cove. And with Sauron having mobilised his forces near Haracloch, he's actually forced to move back down south and move away from the border, and he's able to fend them off and fight off, but then multiple wave assaults from the cove start appearing. The ships keep sailing back to Tonreef's domain, they keep picking up more demons and bringing them back, which means Rervlaror's primary defensive for now is around the banks. And then with the Dragons, at this point, Tonreef essentially has domain over all of central and northern Rollock, as well as the Storm Peak and the foot of the peak, so he's been able to block up the Wood Elves at the Northern Passage, and he's breached the Tavicorn, and he's now, or not breached it, but he's tied the Dragons up in protecting it. And with a third force, with the initial two otherwise occupied, Tonreef personally comes forward and moves in, and Haracloch is rather quickly overwhelmed, with most of the forces pulling back to Jarethil. And there's a couple of brief skirmishes that happen, and this is when you start seeing the notable figures start being caught out and being slain between 254 and 253 BGS. You've got out of the line of Rothtain, no one falls, but in this initial assault. In the line of Hirith, however, of Dothalon, the two eldest sons, Finlane and Furlin, both fall, one defending the western bank and one near Dothalon, leaving just Furvis out of the three sons and then continuing in this conflict throughout, and it is notable in this point that Tonrith lays siege to Jarethil. Furlin's two oldest sons, Velkith and Vernir. Velkith is one of the defenders who falls at Jarethil, and Vernir falls in the Battle of the Cove, but in doing so he actually saves his uncle Fervis and is able to get him to safety, and Vernir stands with about 90 soldiers in a final stand to protect the refugees, some of which come from Jarethil, as this happens in 253 BGS, so maybe a month or two after Jarethil falls. The actual siege of Jarethil, however, they hold out for 10 days, and the 10 days are an incredibly brutal fight. They're able to repel, but eventually the walls are broken, or I should say breached, and then the onslaught once that line is broken, it becomes a chaotic, just every man for himself almost defense, and Sauron is caught in the Great Hall of Jarethil by Tonrith personally. And it is notable, and I will say, that Tonrith is not a human, and he's not a demon. He is a half-ogre. He's a half-ogre who's got blessed weapons and armor by Nagrasak. And the two duel, and Tonrith wins, slaying Sauron, but Sauron actually inflicts such a grievous wound on Tonrith's chest that it actually forces Tonrith not only to flee from the siege, he actually has to flee back to his own territory beyond the Rolathine, into the Storm Peak, which at this point is the Shadow Hill, where he's twisted the Hall of the Mages into his own fortress, and he flees there to recover. And he's actually not seen for quite some time afterwards. But despite all of this, Jarethil does fall, and in the panic, in the onslaught, Sauron's son, Sarnkor, who becomes Sarnkor the... Where is it? He becomes Sarnkor III of Rervlaror, and he was not present at the Siege of Jarethil. He was actually, and it was smart of Sauron in some cases, he kept the prince behind at the Spire Hills to guard the way through, both an important role and also keeps him safe. And he gives a general order to all resistance going on, all scattered around the Western Territories, to retreat across the Spire Hills so they can form up a defense and protect the Eastern Territories, and actually recover and wait for aid, as Sauron had sent requests for aid to both the kingdoms of Tarasil and Capaltir. Before his death, that is. But Sarnkor, in doing this, inadvertently caused a slight that would haunt Rervlaror for essentially the rest of its days. And that is because at this point Heracloch has fallen, Jarethil has fallen, Dothalon is still standing, and it has remnants of some survivors from House Ebthil and some survivors from House Brinzen, among pretty much the entirety of what's left of House Herald's forces. And they are stuck, and when word reaches them that Sarnkor had fled with the troops, and now that they were completely surrounded by demon forces, with the Dracons unable to lend any aid or anything, they felt understandably quite abandoned, and they ended up shutting up shop and having to hold there until aid came. They had no real choice, and this would be something that would keep in their memory. And I won't drift into the rest of Tonrif's War, otherwise this is going to go off course in terms of the video. But all that needs to be known is once recovery has occurred from both Tarasil and Cafaltir, as well as Telemaris and the Wood Elves, together the four forces do move back in, and they do help recover the western half of Rervlaror. And they push on, they besiege Tonrif at the Shadow Hill. Tonrif... Is it? No, they lay siege to the Shadow Hill, but Tonrif's actually fled to his original fortress of Thurlog, where, even though they confronted and duelled him, he managed to escape. After this point, at the conclusion of Tonrif's War, the Kingdom of Rervlaror immediately go into recovery, and despite the slight against, or the unintended slight against House Hirith and House Brinsen primarily, House Seedthil is a bit more on the fence about how they feel on it. The Kingdom of Rervlaror actually undergoes quite a decent period of recovery. They are completely absent from the Idros Years of Sorrow, the events that saw the Troll Civil War upon the Isle of Idros, and through Tonrif's manipulations and the finally pushing back the ogres who had launched an assault on the Twin Isles. But in those years, Rervlaror is just going through a period of recovery. They're able to, and under Sonkor, they're able to replenish their fleet and make it quite strong, and this is done with aid from the others, some from the Wood Elves, some from Tarasil. Like, the kingdoms all work together to help each other replenish. And Rervlaror, as the land that got the most damaged aside from Darrenvale, also gets a lot of support. But the ships then fall under the command of Kylith of House Vortiska, as this is both, he was skilled, he did become the heir of Farallon as well, and he is also the younger brother of Velian, who Sonkor married. So, very closely tied there, and they rebuild the fleet, and it's a good thing that they do, because shortly after the Years of Sorrow, Galakaros, the Crisis of Galakaros occurs. The Crisis of Galakaros obviously has, well, I say obviously, it has Sinepia at the forefront. It is what leads to the, if you've seen the Goblin video, is what leads to the Goblins having to abandon Northern Haraketh. And Sinepia's primary focus is on the weakened Twin Isles and Sarakarth as ways to entrench onto the other lands, and it works very well. But Destinal is largely absent from this conflict. It's primarily just the Twin Isles and Shar dealing with it. Up until Sinepia launches 3 assaults. She launches one onto Lossakoth, she launches one into Cafaltir, and she sends a force, and it's just ships, there's no soldiers, just ships, and she sends them to attack the Rervlaror fleet, which is docked in the Aphalas Cove. The attacks are weaker than her other forefronts, and she gets beaten at Lossakoth, beaten at Cafaltir, and the fleet is an interesting one, because it actually does significant damage to the Rervlaror fleet, although this was also intended as Sankor working with Trollvin, who is the leader of the Dracons at the time, and King Kalerth of Kafaltir had come up with this plan, and the ships from Kafaltir and Darenthal would sail around and trap the force of Senevia into the cove with the Rervlaror ships basically as a not a decoy but a lure, effectively, and it works. Rervlaror's ships do take sizable casualties, as I said, but they're able to completely crush that portion of Senevia's fleet, and combined with other engagements that happen in the north around Tartak, this completely cripples Senevia's seafaring capabilities, and the last ships that she has are those blockading the northern area of Idros. And the forces of Rervlaror are the ones alongside the Dracons, alongside Terrasil, and alongside some of the goblins of Haraketh, and they are the ones who move down to try to liberate the Twin Isles from Senevia's forces. And in the ship engagements, they succeed very well. Sankor is injured, but he does kill the goblin captain, and it's in that duel that he gets injured. And this injury would eventually lead to his demise, as it was laced with a very slow-acting poison. But upon landing on Talonser, they're able to quickly push back Senevia's forces that had been a bit too stretched out now, and this works quite well. Martek, who is Kyla's older brother and the original heir of Fortiska, is actually slain on the invasion. But aside from that, there are no real major losses for the Kingdom of Rervlaror in this effort, and eventually they move on and help in the final battles around Baraloth. And it is notable that in all of this, despite that slight, House Hirith and House Brinzen have been showing faith still. They have still been standing by them and aiding them, but it is after Galakaros that this changes. Shortly after the crisis is concluded, the poison finally does its work on Sankor and he passes. And that leaves Rervlaror in a bit of a predicament. They're still recovering their fleet, they're still recovering some of their territory, repairing it and everything. They have been weakened by the two wars, so in general their population is also weaker, but now there is another issue where their king has just passed, their new king is still a child, and now there is a lot of uncertainty and things going on. I'm sorry about the dog. Okay, I think we're okay now. Right. Sorry about that. The Velian takes control of Rervlaror temporarily as her son, Sarlath, who would actually become Sarlath the second, and I say this should become because this is the point at which I've got when it comes to the timeline writing. So we're on the precipice of all of this beginning to happen. This is where I've gotten to. So the actual intricate details are, from this point forward, are subject to change and everything. But Velian understands that her realm is struggling, especially in the west, with everything that's happened to them. In the east, despite going on a tour that she tries to begin to try to show face all around the territory, starting specifically in the west, in the east she also orders the construction of a new territory within the eastern lands to try not only to give more security, but also to ensure that if Farallon was attacked for any reason, it would be able to get aid a lot faster than it normally would be. And she goes to all of this effort. She looks for prospects for her marriage prospects for her daughters as well, Ellerin and Lorona. But this is where the problems then start. Sensing that this is probably their best opportunity, House Hirith and House Brinzen start acting a bit more strangely. They start refusing certain things that were expected of them. They start all of these machinations, and it is one action, because I will note that their leaders are not stupid. They are very much aware of the fact that if they were to act against the throne, not only would the throne be able to rely on Cafaltir, Tarasil, and even Talamarith, they could potentially also rely on, or the one like geographical support that the rebels could have from the Dragons. The Dragons would not be interested in helping rebels at all, unless they thought their cause was truly just, which they probably wouldn't in this case. But the understanding all of this and understanding that they've got all of these risks and threats about, they decide to rely on some more subterfuge. Unfortunately, this subterfuge, much to their lack of realization, would actually cause the downfall of another human kingdom from which it would never truly recover, and arguably the most powerful of the four, Cafaltir. During this time, Cafaltir is ruled by House Thess, and it's under Kalerth, who ends up passing at Galakaros, but both he and his eldest son Kalern are massively respected throughout Aphalas because of their efforts. Kalern leading a force of both humans and forest dwarves to actually aid in the Adros Years of Sorrow. But Kalern ends up taking the throne, but then he actually passes 10 years later, so not much longer. And then the throne goes to... it skips his sister Cordelia and goes to Varnor, his next eldest brother. And this is where the problem comes. Varnor and his brother Hauron, the two remaining brothers, do not get along, and Cordelia is sort of a bridge between the two. Varnor gets poisoned, and we will go more into detail when we come to the Cafaltir video, but it is relating to House Norgwyn of Val Anoth, which is that tiny region above Pelachoth. And it's, if you want an example, it's like the Weathertop in Lord of the Rings. It's a contested territory that marks like the borders and boundaries of three kingdoms. And Cafaltir, due to what happens here, ends up actually getting plunged into a massive civil war, which completely takes them out of the ability to actually aid Rervlaror. But the culprit from House Norgwyn who does this actually flees and becomes a general for the rebels, who it is then discovered by Velian that the member of House Norgwyn has actually fled to them, and I believe it is Marlek, but I cannot fully remember that, to be honest. It is... no, I don't believe it is Marlek. I believe it's one of his sons, Jarez or Terith. And But again, this is subject to change, and I still need to work on those bits. But they flee and link up with the forces of Hirith and Brinzen in secret. Although Velian knows that they fled into our territory and hears from loyalists from House Seepthil that they are in that area. So she sends forward a company, and it is a company that consists primarily of forces actually from House Fortiska, including her two youngest brothers in fact. Kirin and Elath. Although there are others there as well, such as there are other notable figures there as well, such as Velquin Hirith, who is the last remaining son of Verlin. And there's also Enardren of Heracloch. And this is all occurring in 307 BGS. No, that's not correct. Ignore what I just said. It's meant to be 207 BGS. Is that correct? No. It's around that point. Sorry, I'm getting my dates confused in all of this. If I find... Okay. Kalern of Catapulted dies in 207 BGS, so this is around probably 206, 205 BGS, and what occurs is that at Heracloch there is meant to be a meeting point to have the demand of the House Norgwyn member, who I am referring to as that because I don't want to say the wrong name. And it's basically meant to be a meeting point to negotiate his surrender. But members of both Heracloch and Hirith come, as well as some, not all, but some House Seepthil loyalists. And they come in 3 different forces and completely ambush the expedition force. And the force is almost entirely slaughtered, and... Or no, that's not fully true. It's not fully slaughtered, but a lot of damage is dealt to it. And both of Velian's sons are... not sons. Both of her younger brothers are killed. Which then leaves the line of Fortiska with actually just her sister Rylin, and then Kylith, and as well as their father Kyrin. And this slight is pretty much the nail in the coffin for the unity of Rervlaror. House Fortiska, in hearing of this, automatically just falls directly alongside House Rothtain and the throne. Elements of another force that isn't particularly mentioned because they don't have any real formality, but the Spire Hill Guardians, they sort of fracture as well, and House Seepthil also fractures in half. So at this point the rebellion of the Hills has occurred, and it is House Hirith and House Brinzen in rebellion alongside some allies from Seepthil and the Spire Hills, as well as a select few loyalists that House Norgwyn member was able to bring, up against the rest of Rervlaror, House Rothtain, against pretty much the entire east of Rervlaror. And the civil war, the rebellion begins, it descends into civil war, and I haven't wrote any of this at first, but it ends up... There are specific battles that occur, and eventually it leads to the fracturing of the Kingdom of Rervlaror. And a lot of time happens between this and the formation of these places. There's different realms that pop up and all of that, which I have not done in detail yet. But eventually, before the books occur, because this is how it is at the time of the books, and I am going to quickly try and find the image if I can. Sorry, I'm gonna... Is it going to be on here, or have I... Yes, it is. Right there. And it breaks down into House Rervlaror, this one marked by the yellow and black, and House Hillor, the one marked by the two spears. And a lot of power shifts, a lot of the nobilities shift. Hang on, I'm mucking this up now. There we go. And House Rervlaror takes control of the East. They're the ones who remain closer to the throne and everything. They remain the loyalists, but it shifts and they become the powerhouse. And then in the West, House Hillor takes over, and as a final insult towards the throne, they actually take Jarethil as their capital. So the original capital, the capital where the last king, who they considered as their true king, because the slight that Sonkor did pretty much tarnished their opinion of himself, his son, and all of that. And I will note that I have not wrote about what actually happens to Sonkor's son, the actual king, at the moment, so that is still up and coming. But eventually it breaks down into the two houses, and they have interesting roles in the books, to say the least, or at least the first book. I won't do any more spoilers than that, but the actual, just giving a brief note to it, the actual militaristic side of Rervlaror is one of these things where you would assume with their territories they'd be like Hillman and everything like that they actually lean quite fiercely on halberd-based weapons and things like that. Like they're nigh on useless as cavalry, because they just, especially in the West, they just do not have the land to exercise cavalry maneuvers and things, but they've got a decent seafaring force. It's nothing in comparison to Cafaldir or even Talamarith, but it's still respectable. And they do have quite a well-disciplined military and everything, but it was never the discipline of the military that was a problem with what happens to them. It was panic of their young leadership. But like the efforts of notable figures, like several members of House Hirith, such as Bernir, with his little small defense protecting those who were evacuating from Jarethil, he ended up holding a portion of the cove with about 90 men at one point against the demon onslaughts. So they fight very fiercely, and it is a shame to see what happens to them, unfortunately, but their territory alone almost automatically makes them a target, because they hold that gateway from the east to the west, and the only other avenues for that are either going through the Gulf of Roloc, which would at this point also lead them into Cathimril, because after Tonreef's War, Cathimril is starting to be constructed by the combined strength of Tarazil and the Wood Elves. And then in the north you've got the Northern Passage, and the Northern Passage can't take you anywhere without running into the Wood Elves. Eventually, unless you hold up in the mountains. And, like, despite everything that happens, throughout all of this, Rervlaror do have a massive respect and do stand quite good term-wise with the Dragons. Like, House Herith and all of that, they don't hate the Dragons for not coming to their aid. They are fully understanding of, like, that as much as they're facing what they're facing, the Dragons are facing the full brunt of it. And so they don't outwardly hate them, it's more the fact that their own king abandoned them is the thing that they cannot forgive. And I will state just on the sideline here, because it's going to be wrapping up in a second, that if I am able to get the Med 2 mod working, or Total War mod in general, I am going to probably give the options on which side Rervlaror want to stand because of this like rebellion that happens, just a sort of script way to make it. Because the problem I've got is that if not, then there's not really that many enemies on Destinal. But yes, I wanted to do Rervlaror first, partly, and I will admit partly because I got most of the coat of arms done and I actually finished off the Kingdom coat of arms there, up at the top. I have to admit, I think I might actually do Tarasil next, or Talamarith, because I feel like I talk about those two less, even though their roles are just as significant. And Tarasil actually births probably some of the most significant areas. And also because in terms of the lore, because whilst Tonreef's War was a giant focus around all of Aphalas, pretty much in the coordinated efforts of Nagrasak's forces, with the exceptions of Honor, Kithris, and Arasin, the other areas, such as the Years of Sorrow and Galakaros, like Kafaltir, as a seafaring power, are very heavily involved in them. So, and I don't want to make I don't want to make the other episodes as, like, I've redone this episode 3 times now because the first time I had to cut the second time short, and the first time was just so messy. I just didn't want to upload it, in all honesty. And so I want to make sure that I've got all the listings down and everything. But right now, the bit I'm at with the timeline is effectively the last lyrics of the Kingdoms of Destinal. Errolkarth is about to get plunged into what happens with the Desert Dwarves. Kafaltir is on the precipice of its civil war. Rervlaror's on the precipice of its rebellion. Darenthal pretty much remains the last one standing, as Tarasil and Talamarith actually go through some other changes, and unlike their other fellow humans, their changes are actually more peaceful in terms of transition. And so yeah, Kafaltir is probably going to be the biggest. But yes, that is where I want to conclude it, partly because my throat is drying up. So I do hope you all liked this. I also hope that I choose the right music for the background, because I was commented on that last time. And please do comment, like, and subscribe. Please do check out the other videos, the other series and all that. Share with your friends. If you would like to have your own character thrown into the canon of Aphalas' lore in a way that you can choose, providing it does not break the canon, then please do sign up for membership on the Ko-fi page, because that is one of the added benefits that I am having to have your character canonized into my world building in your full design, as much as the design as you want. And again, please do check out the Ko-fi page. I am looking at starting to hopefully soon put up some Liberation of Destinal paperback books on there, so there'll be more books than just Code of Chivalry on there in terms of physical, but the ebooks are already out there. Please do check out the links in the description. A follow over on the Twitch or the Spotify would be brilliant. And I also just want to throw in a little note that I do apologise about the audio issues on the last podcast episode. I have been commented that there was some audio imbalance with the mics, and I will be looking at changing that. It's just a bit difficult to adjust the mics and everything. But yes, and I mean, I may do Tarrasil next, or I might do Darenthal, or I might look elsewhere. I wanted to focus on the humans to start with, normally, because I've already done others. But there is another faction that has occurred to me that I have not looked at, per se, and that is the Temple Guard of Galeria, a very important force, so they may actually come into the next episode, so yes. And I can promise you that there is a lot more lore coming, and I am going to start doing some more videos on more than just Aphalas as well, so Teremedy, Starburn, and my other works as well. So yes, hope you all enjoyed, and until next time, welcome to the Kingdom of Aphalas and the world of Fellow Mind Books.